warm welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm here at the North Indian state of Uttar Pradesh in the city of gods, Vrindavan, commonly known as a land of widows. In this edition of In Focus, we will take a look how poverty and neglect force widows in India into begging and at times to prostitution. India is counted among fastest developing nations of the world, both economically and in terms of population. On one side, the developments are the valuable assets of the nation, while on the other, problems of poverty and deprivation of very basic rights for many is a grave concern. Among this huge chunk, there are more than 40 million widows in India. Almost 10% of the country's female population are the most deprived, not only in terms of government support, but also because of social exclusion. Majority of these widows are known as a living sati, a reference to the outlawed practice in India of widow burning. Sati is a tradition where widows jump onto their husband's funeral pyres. This tradition was, however, first banned by Britain's colonial rulers, but exceptional cases still occur in parts of India.
Well, it's a very, very sad story, especially because not that they are socially ostracized, they suffer all kinds of economic deprivation. They also are, presented in such a way, the life unfolds before them almost as if they are not a person, but just a kind of, living being who just is condemned to live.
In the dark streets of Vrindavan, more commonly known as the city of widows, India's forgotten women live. These widows were once revered as mothers, sisters and daughters, but now many of them are seen with skeletal faces, shrouded in white saris, and they flock to the holy city of Vrindavan, waiting to die without seeing theirs again.
They are a very neglected and marginalized community. No one really pays attention to them, and they're truly forgotten. So it's time that we bring some sort of a real constructive way to emphasize their condition and help them.
Sarla Dasi came to Vrindavan 3 years ago as she was thrown out of home by her son, and when I asked her about her family, suddenly she bursted into tears and replied, "I have no one except Lord Krishna, a Hindu god."
जो लोग हाथ मारने में दम नहीं तो लोग को मैं पाऊँ जब अपने हाथ पर थक गए तो अब चली जाओ यहाँ से कहा तुम्हारो कोई बात ना है बेटा कहूँ भीख मांगेंगे गुजारो करेंगे.
The Hindu widows most often face a battery of social taboos. Traditionally, when a man dies, widow is expected to renounce all worldly pleasures. In India, widows should no longer look attractive and are expected to wear only simple white dresses for the rest of their lives. An orthodox widow may be expected to cut her hair or even shave her head.
A lot of it, of course, is cultural. That is the history and the tradition, that they come from, and that our society is made of. So that's the one big reason why they are there. Some of the reason that they are in this condition today also has to do a lot with the economics of a particular city.
These cities are like magnets for widows, and today they are full of dingy guest houses and ashrams where impoverished and abandoned widows come. It is common knowledge that younger widows are often sexually exploited in these places.
There is so much of threat perceived of the sexuality of widow women that they are totally forced to become, deface the whole thing and devote artificially. I don't know whether they really want to devote all their life to in service of God, but they are made to do that because society fears them wandering around making friends or getting married again.
To know more on the life of these widows in Vrindavan, Press TV team went to Maitri, an NGO that has been working for the widows since year 2010. The chairperson of the NGO, Winnie Singh, said,
Initially, actually, this Vrindavan and Varanasi, all these places were inhabited essentially by the widows from West Bengal, some from Orissa. And also from West Bengal also there were certain districts from where they came. So these ones actually they are referred to as cultural widows because there are certain cultural norms which kind of brought these widows over here. But in today's date, what we are seeing is the profile is changing some bit. While they are still coming from Bengal, but now there is something called an economic widow, which has started coming in, so which is from Bihar, UP, Haryana, Rajasthan, everywhere. And these widows come there because, they are turned out from their homes. Some of them are actually, they have their husbands, but the husband has either remarried or he's just thrown her out or, it's just a bad marriage. Then there are some who are widows, but their children don't want to keep them home. They're treated so shabbily that they've started coming here.
As I approached Maitri for further information about widows in Vrindavan, the chairperson of the NGO invited me for a special seminar titling Reaching Out to the Widow Mothers of Vrindavan.
Through a grant.
The panelists discussed all the odds faced by widows in Vrindavan, discussed the government schemes and the flaws in their implementation process.
Does early marriages still take place in India, and what should be done to stop these widows from different parts of India coming to Vrindavan and live there?
Unfortunately, India does still have a substantial number of states where child marriage does take place, and the government is making all efforts, and we NGOs are making all efforts to ensure gradually to wipe out this. And Kishori Yojana and many government schemes have come.
In 2007, government planned of starting some remarriage if some widows want. What happened to that plan?
As per law, you would agree with me that that is something that you don't need any separate legislation for it. It's all about again that awareness into the social consciousness, accepting this. Otherwise, there's nothing which prevents legally. So what prevents is the mindset. So what it needs is not government, but that mindset change has to come from the community itself.
Winnie Singh made us aware of the fact that widows living in Vrindavan are warm and welcoming, but they're scared of the strangers because these widows have been abandoned and hardly anyone comes to see them. The day I planned to visit the holy city of Hindu gods, a 3-member team from the Maitri NGO accompanied Press TV team to the city of widows. While we entered the city, the first thing one can easily notice is the women dressed in white. They are found on the side streets while hunched over with walking canes, their heads shaved and their pain itched by hundreds of deep wrinkles on their faces.
Widow, who probably is just about 40, but she looks like she's 60. She's gone through a certain, bad time in her life that she's aged so fast over there.
These Hindu widows, the poorest of poor, are shunned from society when their husbands die, not for religious reasons, but because of traditions and because they're seen as a financial drain on their families. They cannot remarry or wear jewellery. They're forced to shave their heads and typically wear white outfits, while walking in their shadows is considered to be a bad luck.
All these things were basically to make her look unattractive and also psychologically damaging her in the bargain, because the minute you are in a coarse white cloth and your head is shaved, you are stigmatized instantly. You are identifiable from a distance. And at the same time, then culturally, it was always said, a widow is inauspicious.
Radhe, Radhe, Radhe. Though the subject is forbidden to get an instant brush off if brought up with authorities, but authorities say,
yes, there are schemes for widows. There are old age pension schemes for widows. Some states have rehabilitation schemes for widows. How well they actually implemented is a question mark. Obviously, some states perform better than the others. There are the quantum of funds provided as pension is also very insufficient. It needs to be, raised a hell of a lot more. But to a short answer to your question, there are schemes. They need to be implemented better. These schemes to be revised to sort of get the full impact of these schemes to the actual beneficiary.
First of all, there's an act which had been passed where we give pension to widows so that they can sustain their families without having to go with a begging bowl to their relatives or anyone. All the widows, I can tell you, are not accessible to scheme because many of them don't know about the schemes. If they knew about the schemes, they would be. That is where the politicians, the local self-help governments and Panchayati Raj people can help. And I personally feel that there may be very few people who are not aware of the program, but a lot of people are aware of it and a lot of funds are kept for it. But even then, it is not much. It needs to be more.
Disliked by society, young and old, in-laws and their relatives, widows are finally dumped in Vrindavan. Today they live in the temples and ashrams or seen on the streets. They sing devotional songs in temples and wait for long queues for food or money on the streets. Reports say most of them earn between $4 to $20 a month. There is little or no financial support from their families, while 70% of these widows have heard of the Destitute's Widow Pension Scheme, but only a quarter of them actually get it. Almost 58% of them have not applied for a pension, being unaware about such schemes. 82% didn't know how to apply and whom to approach or bribe for a pension.
They beg for food, or if they are given money, then they might buy it. They are in a really pathetic state. They are exploited in terms of money. They are exploited in terms of not getting their rights. Their health status is extremely weak. You see a widow or a woman of the age of maybe 40 or 45 who's totally bent over, and she looks like she might be 65, 70, maybe 20 or even 30 years older than her actual age. They complain of so many different health issues which are absolutely related to nutrition.
It is estimated that more than 15,000 widows exist in this town, most of them dressed in white, the traditional Hindu garb of widowhood. Fresh reports, however, suggest the number is swelling. The survey published by the United Nations Development Fund for Women and the Delhi-based Guild of Service, an NGO working for Indian Charity for Widows, light up the harsh realities for the widows of Vrindavan. The study titled Spirituality, Poverty, Charity Brings Widows to Vrindavan by Usha Roy casts an important spotlight on the plight of widows in India. The organization working for the development, empowerment and rehabilitation of widows found that 82% of widows moved to Vrindavan as their husbands had left no savings for them. 65% said they owned no property, and only 50% of those who owned property said they were able to assess it. It also revealed that 40% of women here were married before the age of 12. According to the reports, it is poverty and lack of independence, not spiritual devotion, that has turned the city of widows into a kind of boom town.
See, the discussion in Vrindavan has thrown up a whole issue of multidimensional poverty. And our study has really come up with that the condition of widows is one thing, but their position is something else. So although our report shows that some of the widows are getting a square meal a day, the widows are happier in some way than being with their families where they were stigmatized and not treated well. But yet, if you look at their position in society, it's still not that good. They're still living in apprehension, in fear, with trauma, with guilt. They are not being able to access their entitlements. And so those are some of the learnings we've got from our work on widows in Vrindavan. We also recognize that a lot of work has still to be done at the source areas, because Vrindavan is only a consequence. And that is why our work with communities is fundamental.
On the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day on 8th March 2011, UN Women announced the launch of a new regional program to address the needs of widows in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka.
The data from the census was clearly showing that 40 million widows were existing in India as per the census head count. So there would be even more. Here we had 40 million young widows. A large amount of these 40 million were young because of conflict, because of HIV and AIDS. And here was a whole analysis that we were having this productive resource that was stigmatized, that was not accessing development resources. And so it became very clear for UN to start taking this on as an issue not just of social exclusion, but of development.
The 3-year program, funded jointly by UN Women, Swiss National Committee and the Standard Chartered Bank, will be implemented in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka to reduce the social exclusion faced by widows.
Very clearly our strategy is based on human rights. That's where we come from, being a UN body for women. However, what we are hoping to do is to not create small units again. That is what a number of NGOs are doing, and which is good. But being a UN body, our comparative advantage lies in trying to get the whole discussion on citizenship center stage for widows, which means that we want to converge development funds on the widows at the level of the district so that it impacts upon their lives. And so that is our approach, to try and get that entitlement to them so that we do not create a pilot that doesn't get upscaled. We really work through the government machinery, and on the other side, we will be working with the civil society to change the norms of the society and how they view widows, how they start seeing them as a development resource.
Widows in the Indian holy city of Vrindavan are still living a life of neglect despite the government's ambitious schemes to uplift their plight. Extreme poverty has forced many into prostitution and even begging on the streets.
Every woman who's vulnerable gets exploited. Young boys who are vulnerable get exploited. And there is enough studies on that. So how do we reduce these vulnerabilities become fundamental? Now, if women in Vrindavan are not having toilets, are not having shelter, they may be getting their food from the mandirs because of the philanthropy, there is bound to be some kind of exploitation or the other. The fact that our study has found that they are living in fear of exploitation is adequate indicator that there is exploitation. Otherwise, why would they fear it?
It is said widows have come to Vrindavan since 16th century, hoping Lord Krishna will grant them moksha or freedom from the cycle of birth and rebirth. But nowadays, they hope material benefits of Vrindavan will help them survive one more day of this life. Abandoned by their families and neglected by the authorities, the widows of Vrindavan, commonly known as Dasis, servants of God, have few support system other than each other. Manu Dasi has been living here in Pagal Baba Ashram since 30 years. She came to this place from the Indian state of West Bengal. She was widowed at the age of 45. Since then, she survives on one meal a day. She and all others like her have no means of income except 24 cents they get for singing hymns for 8 hours a day.
सब लोग भजन करती है, 3-6 रुपया मिलती है, 750 ग्राम चीनी सूखा और 3 लीटर तेल। ठाकुर जी का भोग लगाती, मैं खाती, बर्तन धो कर फिर भजन जाती है। हमें याद रखोगे ना?
For her, marrying again is a sin and she would never think of remarrying as an alternative, but somehow she lives in a ray of hope that one day this harsh life will end. The only alternative for these widows in Vrindavan is a life to be lived on the streets as a beggar in their own homeland and to face humility. Some of the ashrams today are also scattered with diseases like tuberculosis, dysentery and sexually transmitted diseases. Most often in the poorest ashrams, medical help is virtually non-existent.
Poverty is multidimensional. We respect Amartya Sen's discourse on this, and we believe that economic poverty is only the first step to be able to reduce capability poverty. And unless our widows are strengthened in being able to use their capacities much more, irrespective of the fact that they get 2 square meals a day, they will still remain socially poor. And that is where our focus is.
At Mathura Ashram in Vrindavan, conditions are critical as widows abandoned after the death of their husbands, leaving no chance for them of a better life. They face situations of hunger, starvation and negligence while surviving with only 1 meal a day. Maitri, an NGO in collaboration with Akshaya Patra Foundation, provide meal to some of the widows every day.
Every day this kitchen prepares food for almost 200,000 poor children and 600 widows.
We are feeding some widows of Vrindavan also, and we have commenced this feeding since about a year back. We started feeding the widows of Vrindavan. With our experience of feeding the children in the government schools, because that is where the children from the lower economic strata of the society come from. So we could utilize that and leverage that, and we have started feeding the widows also.
Meet 80-year-old Basant Chakravarti, busy reading Bhagavad Gita, the holy book of Hindus, while sitting in the premises of Chaitanya Vihar, women's scheduled residence. In a meeting, she is translating some lessons to us while reading from the famous book. Good always wins over the evil. I asked her what brought her to Vrindavan. She replied,
देश को जमीन उमीन है ना, लड़का बच्चा तो हमारा नाम को तो सब है, तो हमरा वो काज फैसला करने तो देरी हो गया, तो आज कमरा नहीं है, तो हम इधर को आया.
For widows, hope for death will save them from being condemned to such a life again. The UN Woman has made suggestions to help the living conditions for the widows of Vrindavan in the recent UNIFEM study, including enacting legislation to make all Indian marriage registrations compulsory, which will also help prohibit and lessen the number of child marriages still on rise in India, to set up more shelters for widows with adequate food and proper health care, and to work on all important aspects relevant which can help uplift the plight of these forgotten section of the society.
Our vision is definitely to create strong laboratories of how to work with widows, to change stereotypes in the government and the civil society, not to just view a widow as being an old, above 45 woman, but to really face the ground reality where today widows are much younger because of HIV and AIDS, to treat them as a productive resource, and to be able to treat them first as Indian citizens and as a woman, rather than first seeing them in the frame of a widow and then in the frame of womanhood.
Lack of proper education, basic human rights, extreme poverty and strong cultural beliefs in the conservative Hindu caste system are the major cause of their sufferings. Experts say although government has made schemes, but catering to such a huge chunk has become really difficult, leaving more sufferings for destitutes who have been forced to embrace pain of being burnt alive.
Ostracized by the society, thousands of Indian widows flock to this holy city of Vrindavan, waiting to die. But the question remains, how superstitions overpower basic human rights in this part of the world, and how can injustice prevail in this city where gods live? Thanks for watching this edition of In Focus here on Press TV. See you next time. Till then, goodbye.